Since the beginning of the day, 106 combat engagements have been recorded along the front line. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Pokrovsk and Kostyantynivka directions remain difficult. More details about the situation on the front line are in our next report. Ukrainian units continue to hold the northern part of Pokrovsk. Through active operations, they are preventing Russian forces from assembling assault groups for further attacks. This was reported by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky. In the area of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, through active operations, we are blocking the enemy's attempts to amass assault infantry groups and advance around these settlements. Directly in the cities, our soldiers continue to hold certain areas. Meanwhile, the occupiers disregard their losses in manpower. Thus, as military experts note, as a result of the counter-offensive actions of the Ukrainian army, the Russian objective to encircle the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad group has failed.
The width of the bottleneck is less than 4 kilometers. That is critically small. It's practically insignificant. That's why it's vital to hold the northern outskirts of the city of Pokrovsk, to defend them and prevent the pincers from closing around our garrison in Myrnohrad. Moreover, in the northern sector of the conflict, the comprehensive and decisive route of the Russian Dobropilya salient is now definitively coming to its conclusion. The Russian army had previously made concerted efforts to advance aggressively in that strategic area, attempting to push forward simultaneously in two distinct and challenging directions, but their offensive has ultimately failed. And natural continuation of the counterattacks by the defense forces, by those units that are eliminating it, are strikes on the flank and rear of the 51st Army Group that is trying to encircle the city of Sever.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on the Pokrovsk sector, Ukrainian defenders repelled a third of all recorded attacks by the occupying forces on the front line. The situation also remains difficult in the Kostyantynivka direction. Here, since the beginning of the day, nearly as many Russian assaults have been repelled. Ukrainian soldiers are also steadfastly holding the defense in other sectors of the front. In total, the defenders have repelled more than a third of Russian attacks on the Lyman, Oleksandrivka, Sloviansk, Southern Slobozhansky and Huliaipol bridgeheads. Military experts note that the redeployment of elite units to difficult sections of the front indicates that the enemy has no operational reserves.
In the same Zaporizhzhia and Pokrovsk directions, the most combat-ready units of the Russian occupation army are being used as operational reserves and assault units. The same naval infantry units. This is not the intended role of the naval infantry. A similar situation applies to the airborne troops who are being thrown into what are essentially meat grinder assaults. Therefore, it is not possible to speak of the occupiers having any combat-ready units at this point.
In just the past 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated 1,240 Russian occupiers. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russian army losses since the start of the full-scale war have exceeded 1,178,000 soldiers. In addition, Ukrainian defenders destroyed 1 armored combat vehicle, 34 artillery systems, 2 multiple rocket launch systems, 1 aircraft, and 96 units of enemy vehicles and special equipment. To continue supporting Ukraine and to hold Russia accountable for the war. This was the general call made by the majority of OSCE member states following the meeting of foreign ministers in Vienna. This was stated by diplomat Pasi Rajala, who represents Finland. Currently, that country holds the chairmanship of the organization. He emphasized that Russia's war against Ukraine was the central topic at the OSCE this year. The overwhelming majority of OSCE member states emphasized that we must continue to support Ukraine. We must hold Russia accountable for its actions. When one country challenges the foundations of our collective security, all others must defend them even more actively. Slovenia will join the PURL program and by the end of the year will allocate about 43 million euros to strengthen Ukraine's air defense. This was announced by Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal following his meeting with his Slovenian counterpart. In addition, the heads of the defense ministries agreed to explore the possibilities of joint industrial projects within the so-called Danish model. According to the agreements, the Danish government directly funds certain Ukrainian defense enterprises. The defense ministers of Ukraine and Slovenia also discussed other promising areas of cooperation.
We focused on ways to develop our cooperation. We are ready to share our experience in the use of interceptor drones, deep strike, and other types of UAVs. We also discussed the possibility of providing training weapons for the preparation of Ukrainian soldiers. Another issue is the provision of frozen Russian assets to support Ukrainian defense. Thank you for a productive meeting and consistent support.
More than 20 countries have already joined the PURL initiative to supply American weapons to Ukraine, according to Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha. By the end of the year, according to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, allies will raise up to $5 billion in support of Kyiv. The majority of this amount will be directed toward protecting Ukrainian airspace. Nikita Skoblikov will continue on this topic.
The Kremlin tried to disrupt new contributions to the defense capability of the Ukrainian armed forces, but they failed, said Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha. According to him, more and more countries are continuing to join the PURL initiative, and new funding is coming in. Just in the past few days, the program has received 8 additional contributions from its participants.
The visit to NATO headquarters brought about $1 billion in additional contributions to PURL. 5 additional countries and 8 more contributions from states that were already participating. As of today, 21 countries are participating in PURL, with total commitments amounting to $4,180 million. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on Facebook.
For the first time, countries that are not members of NATO have joined the PURL program. We're talking about Australia and New Zealand. Together, they are preparing to provide over $70 million. But even this is not the limit. The Greek publication Kathimerini, citing sources, reports that Washington is strongly urging Athens to also join the NATO program to support the Ukrainian armed forces.
American diplomats urged Foreign Minister Georgios Gerapetraitis to announce Greece's participation at the NATO meeting and suggested that Greece sign the General Framework Agreement to demonstrate its commitment, leaving the question of the contribution amount for later. Washington also advised Athens not to join the minority of NATO countries that are not making contributions. From the publication by Kathimerini,
this week, the European NATO members, Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, and Norway, contributed $700 million for the purchase of American weapons for Ukraine. Canada also joined them, allocating another $150 million. According to Ukraine's Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal, the majority of the funds are aimed at strengthening the protection of Ukrainian airspace. Since
the launch of the PURL initiative, it has provided about 75% of all missiles for Patriot systems and about 90% of the missiles for other air defense systems supplied to Ukraine. Denis Shmyhal, Ukraine's Minister of Defense, on Telegram.
This is a special mission for Ukrainian diplomacy.
It is a special task for Ukrainian diplomacy to maintain the pace in defense programs and projects with America and other partners. The pace of diplomacy largely determines the strength of our defense against Russian occupiers and the possibilities for our active measures, our reach, and our protection from Russian strikes.
The PURL initiative is aimed at providing Ukraine with critically important weaponry. Within its framework, NATO countries finance the supply of American weapons according to Ukraine's list of priorities. The scheme is simple. Kyiv compiles a list of the necessary weapons, coordinates the monthly needs with NATO and the US, after which the allies contribute funds to a common pool. Washington purchases the required weapons and transfers them to Ukraine. The mechanism also reduces bureaucracy. All coordination is carried out centrally through NATO. Prioritize
the Ukraine list, meaning the list of Ukraine's priority needs. The Ukrainian side submits a request for what is most urgently needed at the moment, and then American weapons are actually purchased with non-American money. By
the end of the year, according to the NATO Secretary General, the PRO program will have raised up to $5 billion. But for 2026, the goal is to significantly increase this figure. Mark Rutte says that the North Atlantic Alliance aims to raise at least $12 billion.
At present, more than 2/3 of the allies have made commitments under this program. Allies and partners have already allocated more than $4 billion to PURL, which allows us to reach the $5 billion mark for the entire year. But we must do more, and all allies must make every effort to ensure our readiness and that the responsibility is shared fairly.
Let me remind you, the PURL program was launched on July 14, 2025. At that time, Washington and NATO signed an agreement under which the allies financed the purchase of American weapons for Ukraine.